At a luxury company gala, the CEO's wife laughed at a quiet janitor in front of everyone. She mocked his job, his clothes, his place in the room. But seconds later, the CEO walked in, froze, and said 4 words that changed everything. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Watch till the end, because what that janitor really was will leave you speechless. But wait, before we begin, comment on where you are watching from, and please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff tomorrow. Comment, "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. And comment on what you learn also. So, let's get started. No one ever forgot the night of the gala. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above the ballroom, casting soft gold light across polished marble floors. Every guest inside the room wore confidence like perfume-tailored suits, diamond watches, dresses that whispered money with every step. This was not just a celebration. It was a reminder of power. At the center of it all stood Vanessa Harrington, the CEO's wife. She moved through the room like she owned more than just the building. Every smile she gave felt measured. Every handshake felt like a test. People laughed a little louder around her, nodded a little faster, leaned in a little closer, because proximity to her meant proximity to influence. This gala was supposed to honor the company's latest record-breaking quarter. Investors, executives, city officials, all carefully chosen. Every detail had been planned weeks in advance, except one. Near the far wall, partially hidden behind a towering white column, a man quietly pushed a cleaning cart across the floor. He wore a plain gray uniform with no badge of importance. No conversation followed him. His shoes were worn, his posture calm, his movements unhurried. He stopped occasionally to wipe fingerprints from glass tables or adjust chairs that had been slightly moved. No one noticed him. No one except Vanessa. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw him. At first, it was irritation. This was a black tie event, a flawless image, and yet here he was, mop bucket, cleaning spray, quietly existing in a room designed to impress. She watched him for a moment, her lips tightening. Then she smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was decision. Vanessa lifted her champagne glass and gestured to a nearby event coordinator. She whispered something. The coordinator hesitated, glanced toward the man, then nodded nervously. Moments later, the music softened. Vanessa turned, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Excuse me," she said smoothly. "Can we pause for just a second?" Conversation slowed, heads turned, silence rippled outward. She pointed not angrily, not loudly, just enough. Who allowed this to happen? Dozens of eyes followed her finger. They landed on the janitor. He looked up, confused, holding a folded cloth in his hand. Vanessa stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the marble. "This is a gala," she said, smiling thinly, "not a maintenance shift." A few nervous laughs slipped out of the crowd. The man said nothing, and in that silence, something began to change. The public humiliation. The silence didn't last long. It never does. A few guests chuckled, first polite, uncertain laughs meant to show loyalty without fully committing. Others followed, louder this time, not because the moment was funny, but because laughing felt safer than standing still. Vanessa noticed. She always did. She turned slightly, letting the room absorb her confidence. She continued lightly, swirling the champagne in her glass. "I'm sure you work very hard, but surely you understand this isn't the place for mops and buckets." Her tone was smooth, controlled, almost kind, the kind that hurt more. The janitor stood there, his hands resting calmly on the handle of his cart. His face remained unreadable, no embarrassment, no anger, just quiet attention. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't worry," she said, smiling wider. "This isn't personal. It's just standards." She gestured around the room. "Look around you. These people are here because they earned their place." A few guests nodded instinctively. Others shifted uncomfortably. One executive's wife leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Is this necessary?" He didn't answer, He just stared at his glass. Vanessa stepped closer to the janitor now. "You see," she said softly, lowering her voice just enough to feel intimate, "when you let things like this slide, people forget where they belong." She glanced at the event coordinator. "Please escort him out. We'll have maintenance handle this after the event." The coordinator hesitated again. The janitor finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said calmly, his voice low but steady, "I was told to be here." The room stilled. Vanessa laughed short and sharp. "By who?" He paused, just briefly. "By the board." A ripple moved through the crowd. Vanessa's smile faltered for half a second, so fast most people missed it. "The board?" she repeated, amused. "That's impressive." She leaned in slightly. "Do you often pretend to be important? Or is tonight special?" The laughter returned louder this time, but something was wrong. The janitor didn't react, no pleading, no apology, no defensiveness. He simply nodded once and reached for his card again. "I'll finish up," he said quietly. That's when the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and the CEO walked in. The doors didn't just open, they announced his arrival. A hush rolled through the ballroom as the double doors swung wide, revealing Richard Harrington, the CEO, tall, composed, immaculately dressed, the kind of man whose presence shifted the temperature of a room without a word. Whispers followed him like shadows. "Richard's here." The CEO's finally arrived. Vanessa turned instantly, her posture straightening, her smile reshaping itself into something softer, something proud. "Darling," she said, raising her glass slightly. "Perfect timing." Richard nodded absently, his eyes scanning the room as he walked forward. He was already preparing to deliver a brief speech, already thinking in numbers and optics. Then he saw the janitor. At first, he didn't stop. He took 2 more steps, then 1. Then he froze, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, not in confusion, but in recognition. The janitor was wiping down the edge of a table, his movements steady, deliberate. He hadn't looked up yet. He hadn't noticed the shift in the room, but Richard had. The CEO's face changed. A murmur spread through the crowd as people noticed the pause. Someone coughed. Someone else checked their phone, then quickly looked up again. Vanessa noticed too. She turned, frowning slightly. "Richard," she said, still smiling. "Is everything all right?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on the man in gray. Richard took a slow step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. Vanessa followed his line of sight, irritation flashing briefly across her face when she realized what he was staring at. "Oh, that," she said lightly. "I'm handling it." Richard stopped walking completely. "What?" he said slowly. "Is he doing here?" Vanessa laughed. "Exactly my point." She turned back toward the janitor, preparing to dismiss him once and for all. But Richard raised his hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop her. The room fell silent. The janitor finally looked up. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Something passed between them, something unspoken but heavy. History, memory, weight. The janitor gave a faint nod. Richard swallowed. His jaw tightened. Vanessa's smile faltered again. "Richard," she repeated, this time more sharply. He didn't look at her. Instead, he took one final step forward and said, quietly but clearly, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming tonight?" A gasp moved through the room. The janitor smiled, just slightly. "I wanted to see things for myself," he replied. The CEO exhaled slowly, and that's when everyone realized this was no ordinary janitor. The silence after those words was unbearable. "I wanted to see things for myself." No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. Dozens of eyes darted between the CEO and the janitor, trying to make sense of a moment that didn't fit the room. Vanessa let out a small, awkward laugh. "This isn't funny, Richard," she said, lowering her voice. "If this is some kind of stunt." Richard finally turned to her, and for the first time that night, the confidence drained from her face. His expression wasn't angry. It was careful, measured, the kind of look he reserved for boardrooms, not ballrooms. "This isn't a stunt," he said quietly. He turned back to the janitor. "Ethan," Richard said. The name landed like glass shattering on marble. A few executives stiffened. One man near the bar nearly dropped his drink. A woman whispered, "Did he just say?" Vanessa blinked. "Ethan," she repeated, confused. "You know him?" The janitor, Ethan, nodded once. "Still punctual as ever," he said mildly. A ripple of disbelief spread through the room. Richard straightened his jacket, his voice suddenly formal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're going to pause the program for a moment." Vanessa stepped closer to him, her smile gone now. "Richard, you're embarrassing me." He didn't lower his voice. He didn't soften his tone. "No," he replied. "I think we've already crossed that line." Ethan rested his cleaning cloth on the cart and folded his hands calmly in front of him. He looked around the room at the chandeliers, the guests, the carefully curated success. "It's grown," he said simply. Richard nodded. "Because of you." The words hung in the air. Vanessa's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" Richard took a breath. "Ethan built this company." Gasps echoed instantly, sharp, uncontrolled. Vanessa staggered back half a step. "That's not funny," she said weakly. Ethan looked at her not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet clarity. "It wasn't meant to be," he said. Richard continued, his voice steady now, carrying to every corner of the room. "Before the investors, before the expansion, before my name was ever on the door, there was Ethan." Vanessa's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. No one laughed this time. No one moved. And in that moment, every insult she had spoken began to turn against her. No one spoke, not because they were afraid, but because they were trying to rearrange everything they thought they knew. "Ethan." The name echoed silently through the room. Vanessa stared at him as if the word alone might change the truth. "That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "You said the company started with you." Richard didn't look at her. His eyes were still fixed on Ethan, as though the room no longer existed. "I said I helped build it," he replied slowly. "I never said I built it alone." A murmur rippled through the guests. Phones slipped discreetly into pockets. This was no longer a gala, it was history unfolding. Ethan exhaled softly. "You've done well, Richard," the CEO nodded once. "Only because you left me everything." Vanessa turned sharply. "Left? You mean he sold his shares?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No." The single word carried weight. "I walked away," he said. "No contracts, no buyout, no headlines." Gasps followed. Richard stepped forward. "You disappeared," he said. "One day you were there, the next nothing." Ethan looked down at his hands, roughened by years of quiet work. "I wanted to see what the company would become without me shaping every decision." Vanessa laughed nervously. "So you, what? You became a janitor for fun?" Ethan met her gaze. "I became invisible," he said. The room felt colder. "When people think you have nothing," Ethan continued, "they show you who they really are." Richard swallowed hard. Ethan turned slowly, taking in the executives, the investors, the laughter from moments before. "Tonight was never about celebration," he said. "It was about observation." Vanessa's voice trembled now. "This is ridiculous. If you were so important, why come back like this?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. "Because power hides truth," he said, "and humility reveals it." Richard closed his eyes briefly. "You chose tonight," he said, "because you knew she'd be here." Ethan nodded once. Vanessa stepped back, her heels scraping the marble. "You did this to humiliate me." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said calmly. "You did that yourself." The words landed harder than any insult, and the room finally understood this wasn't revenge, it was a reckoning. The board members were the first to move, not forward back. Chairs scraped softly against the marble as men and women who usually controlled entire floors of the building suddenly looked unsure of where to stand. A few exchanged glances. One of them, an older man with silver hair, cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said carefully, "we weren't informed you'd be attending." Ethan nodded. "That was intentional." Richard turned toward the board. "He's still listed as founder emeritus," he said. His access was never revoked. The silver-haired man stiffened. Yes, but his authority. Ethan raised a hand gently. I'm not here to take control, he said. I'm here to understand what control has become. Vanessa laughed again, sharp and forced. So this is some kind of test? A social experiment? No one answered her. She stepped forward, lifting her chin. Let's be clear. Regardless of the past, this company has rules. You can't just show up disguised and disrupt an event. Ethan looked at her. Disrupt? He gestured toward the room. You invited investors. I invited honesty. The silver-haired board member swallowed. Vanessa, he said cautiously, perhaps it would be wise to. She spun on him. I will not be lectured by someone who quit and someone who cleans floors. The words hit hard, too hard. Richard's head snapped toward her. Enough! The single word cut through the room like a blade. Vanessa froze. Richard took a breath, visibly steadying himself. You embarrassed a man you didn't know, in front of people whose respect we rely on, she scoffed. He embarrassed me. No, Richard said. He revealed you. Ethan remained silent, but his presence weighed heavily. A woman from the board spoke up. There are concerns, she said slowly, about conduct, image, culture. Vanessa laughed incredulously. You're blaming me? The woman didn't flinch. We're questioning everything. Vanessa's voice dropped. You can't do this. Richard's tone was calm but final. They can, and they are. Ethan finally spoke again. This company was built on respect, he said. Tonight showed me how fragile that foundation has become. Vanessa felt it then, not embarrassment, fear, because for the first time in her life, the room wasn't on her side. Vanessa refused to be silent. Silence had never protected her before command had. She took a sharp breath, straightened her shoulders, and laughed as if the entire room were mistaken. Let's not pretend this is about values, she said. This is about a man who couldn't handle being irrelevant. A few gasps followed. Ethan didn't react. That's enough, Richard said. But Vanessa pressed on, her voice rising. You walked away, remember? You abandoned this company. You abandoned responsibility. And now you show up in costume to teach lessons? She turned to the guests. Is this really the behavior of a visionary? Or someone bitter? The room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Ethan finally spoke. I left because I saw what power does when it's left unchecked. Vanessa scoffed. No, you left because you couldn't compete. That did it. One of the board members stood. Vanessa, he said firmly, you're damaging the company. She stared at him. I am the company. Richard looked at her then, not as a husband, but as a leader. No, he said quietly, you're part of it. Or you were. The word hung, there were. Vanessa's voice cracked. You're choosing him over me? Richard hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Ethan watched them, sadness flickering briefly across his face. This was never about choosing, he said. It's about accountability. Vanessa turned on him. You think you're better than me? Ethan met her eyes calmly. No, he said. I think you forgot how to see people. The insult landed deeper than anger. A board member cleared his throat. Effective immediately. Vanessa Harrington is to step away from all company-related events pending review. The words echoed. Vanessa's breath caught. You can't be serious. Richard didn't stop them, didn't defend her, didn't speak. Her power, real power, collapsed in that silence. Ethan reached for his cleaning cart, gripping the handle gently. I've seen enough for tonight, he said. He began to walk away. Vanessa's voice followed him, shaking. This isn't over. Ethan paused at the doorway. He didn't turn around. It already is, he said. And the room finally understood this wasn't humiliation. This was consequence. The aftermath. The gala ended early. No announcement, no farewell speeches, just a quiet unraveling as guests slipped out in clusters, whispering behind raised hands. Laughter had vanished. Music never returned. What remained was damage. Richard stood alone near the center of the ballroom, staring at the shattered champagne glass that no one had bothered to clean up. The symbol felt too obvious. Across the room, board members gathered in tight circles, their voices low and urgent. Words like liability, culture, and exposure floated through the air. Vanessa had disappeared, no dramatic exit, no final words, just absence. Ethan moved slowly, methodically, finishing the task he'd been doing before everything exploded. He wiped a table, straightened a chair, pushed his cart toward the service hallway. Richard followed. "Ethan!" he called. Ethan stopped, but didn't turn around. "I didn't know it would go this far," Richard said. "That's the problem," Ethan replied calmly. "You didn't know at all." Richard exhaled. "I should have stepped in sooner." "Yes," Ethan said. "You should have." They stood in silence for a moment. "Why now?" Richard finally asked. "Why come back like this?" Ethan leaned against the wall, his eyes distant. "Because companies don't fail when profits drop," he said. "They fail when people forget why they exist." Richard nodded slowly. "The board wants you back. Officially." Ethan smiled faintly. "They always do after the damage is visible." Richard hesitated. "Will you?" Ethan looked at him. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether this was a performance or a turning point." Richard swallowed. Down the hallway, voices echoed Vanessa's, angry, shaken. Ethan glanced toward the sound, then back at Richard. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want change." Richard straightened. "Then help me fix it." Ethan shook his head. "No, you have to fix it." He pushed his cart forward again. "I'll be watching," he said over his shoulder. "Just like tonight." Richard stood frozen as Ethan disappeared down the corridor, back into invisibility by choice. For the first time since becoming CEO, Richard realized something terrifying. The company's future no longer belonged to him alone. Vanessa didn't go home. She went to the one place where she still believed she had control: Richard's office. The lights were off when she entered, but the city skyline glowed through the glass walls, painting the room in cold reflections. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Moments later, Richard stepped in. "You embarrassed me," she said immediately. He didn't sit. "You embarrassed yourself." Her eyes flashed. "You let him destroy me." "He revealed you," Richard said, repeating the words she hated most. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "You're really choosing him." "I'm choosing the company." She stepped closer. "Without me, you don't have an image. I've handled donors, press, relationships. And tonight," Richard interrupted, "you handled none of them." The silence stretched. Vanessa softened her voice. "Richard, this board will turn on you too. They always do." "I know," he said. She searched his face, realizing something was different. "You're afraid?" "Yes," he admitted, "but not of them." She frowned. "Then of what?" "Of becoming you." The words hit her like a slap. Her voice dropped. "If Ethan comes back, you lose everything. He won't stop at culture. He'll strip the power away." Richard stared out at the city. "Maybe that's what needs to happen." Vanessa's expression hardened. "I won't let him take what's mine," she said quietly. Richard turned. This is exactly what he was talking about. She stepped back, eyes burning. "You think he's better than me? I think he's honest." That was the final fracture. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Richard said, "but it's one I'll own." She paused at the door. "You have no idea what he's capable of." Richard met her gaze. "Neither do you." She left without another word. Downstairs, Ethan sat alone in the service break room, reading an old company newsletter framed on the wall, "The Vision of Tomorrow." His words printed beneath the title. He smiled faintly. The board's meeting was scheduled for the morning, and by then, everything would change. The boardroom had no chandeliers, no music, no applause, just glass, steel, and a long polished table that reflected every face too clearly. Ethan entered quietly. This time, He wasn't wearing the gray uniform. He wore a simple dark jacket. No logos, no title, just presence. Every board member stood, not out of courtesy, out of memory. Richard took his seat at the head of the table but didn't speak. This wasn't his meeting to lead. Ethan placed a thin folder on the table and looked around slowly. "I won't be staying long," he said. "I never intended to." One board member cleared her throat. "We'd like you to return in an advisory capacity." Ethan shook his head. "Titles didn't build this company. Values did." A man across the table leaned forward. "Then tell us what you see." Ethan opened the folder. Inside were photos, smiling employees, early offices, handwritten mission statements. "This company began as a promise," he said, "that no one would be invisible." Richard lowered his eyes. Ethan continued. "Last night, I watched a man be humiliated for existing. No one interrupted. I watched power excuse cruelty," Ethan said calmly, "and I watched silence protect it." He closed the folder. "You want me back?" he said. "But what you need is courage." Vanessa's name was never spoken. It didn't need to be. "I'm not here to reclaim control," Ethan said. "I'm here to remove what poisons it." A woman from the board asked softly, "What do you want us to do?" Ethan looked at Richard. "Let leadership be accountable, even when it's uncomfortable." Richard nodded. The room held its breath. "I'll remain an observer," Ethan said. "For now." The board exchanged glances. "And if we fail?" Ethan met their eyes. "Then I'll come back." The threat was quiet, but absolute. As the meeting ended, Richard stood. "Thank you." Ethan paused at the door. "This company doesn't belong to founders or CEOs," he said. "It belongs to the people who clean up after your mistakes." And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a boardroom that finally understood power answers to something greater than itself. The company changes. By noon, everyone knew, not officially, not publicly, but companies have a way of talking without speaking. Emails stopped mid-sentence. Meetings were postponed until further notice. Executives walked faster through hallways, avoiding eye contact with employees they'd ignored for years. The story moved faster than policy ever could. A janitor. A gala. The CEO froze. No one knew the full truth, but everyone felt it. On the 23rd floor, two assistants whispered over coffee. "They say the janitor founded the company." "No way." "That's what I heard, and that she humiliated him." Phones buzzed. Someone leaked a blurry photo, Ethan standing beside Richard, the champagne glass shattered at their feet. The image spread quietly through internal chats before being deleted by IT. Too late. Down in the maintenance wing, employees stood a little straighter. For the first time, they felt seen. Ethan walked through the building, unnoticed, again by design. But this time, heads turned, eyes followed. A few people nodded respectfully. He nodded back. In a private conference room, Richard met with legal counsel. "We need a statement," one lawyer said, "before this gets out." Richard shook his head. "No statements." They stared at him. "Transparency isn't something you announce," he said. "It's something you live." Across town, Vanessa sat in her car, watching the company logo glow against the building. Her phone buzzed again. "We need to talk." She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her notes app and typed one sentence. "They think they've won." Her jaw tightened. Back inside the building, Ethan paused near a wall covered in employee photos. Faces of excellence. He studied them quietly. "They still don't see you," he murmured. A young intern passed by and stopped. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Are you?" Ethan smiled gently. "Just someone passing through." She nodded, unsure why her chest felt tight. That evening, Richard stood alone in the boardroom again. The city lights flickered outside as his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "This isn't over," Vanessa said. Richard closed his eyes. "I know," he replied. And somewhere between anger and fear, Vanessa made a decision, one that would force everything into the open. Vanessa's counterattack. Vanessa didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, the city humming outside the glass walls of her penthouse. Her phone lay face up beside her, glowing with drafts she hadn't sent, statements, accusations, stories. She understood something the board didn't. Truth was powerful, but timing was more powerful. By morning, she had made her choice. At 7:14 a.m., an anonymous email hit 3 major business journalists. Subject line, Founder's Dark Past, Hidden for Years. Richard was in his office when legal burst through the door. "We have a problem." He skimmed the screen. His blood ran cold. The email claimed Ethan had been forced out years ago, not by choice, but due to ethical concerns. It hinted at financial impropriety, unverified, carefully vague, dangerous. "It's false," Richard said. "Doesn't matter," legal replied. "It's believable." Across town, Ethan read the article quietly on his phone while sitting in a small cafe. He didn't flinch. The barista glanced at him. "Rough news." Ethan smiled faintly. "Truth always is." Back at headquarters, the board went into emergency session. "We can't ignore this," one member said. "Perception is reality." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "No, integrity is." But doubt had entered the room. Vanessa watched the news coverage from her living room, wrapped in a silk robe. Commentators speculated. Headlines danced around uncertainty. She exhaled slowly, control. Her phone rang Ethan. She hesitated, then answered. "You went quiet for someone with so much to say," he said calmly. "You took everything from me," she replied. "I'm just leveling the field." "You're burning the ground beneath your own feet," Ethan said. She laughed. "We'll see." Ethan's voice didn't change. "If you want war, you'll have to face the truth. I'm counting on you staying silent," she said. Ethan paused. "Then you don't know me at all." He hung up. At headquarters, Richard stared at the board, some standing with him, others drifting away. The company stood at a crossroads, and this time, silence wouldn't save anyone. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, not because of pressure, because Ethan had prepared for this moment years ago. By midday, an independent audit firm was inside the building, not invited by the board, but requested by Ethan himself. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere from rumor to reckoning. In a quiet conference room, Richard watched as files were laid out across the table. Bank statements, emails, signed agreements. "Everything is clean," the lead auditor said. "Painfully so." Richard exhaled. Ethan sat calmly, hands folded. "I kept copies," he said. "Not because I expected betrayal, because I understand fear." Across town, Vanessa refreshed her newsfeed repeatedly. Nothing. No follow-up articles, no confirmations, only silence. Her phone buzzed. "Board member, we need clarification. Immediately." Her stomach tightened. Back at the audit room, the lead investigator frowned. "There is something else." Richard stiffened. "What?" The investigator slid a folder across the table. "This shows irregular transfers made 3 years ago," he said. "Company funds, personal accounts." Richard scanned the names. His heart dropped. Vanessa. The room went quiet. Ethan closed his eyes slowly. "I warned you," he said, not accusing, just tired. The investigator continued. "The transactions were small individually, but patterned, intentional." Richard leaned back, shaken. "Why wasn't this flagged?" Ethan answered softly. "Because power hides well when protected." Across the city, Vanessa received the email she'd been dreading, audit findings attached. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Her reflection in the dark screen told her everything. At headquarters, the board reconvened, this time without hesitation. One member spoke clearly. "The narrative has shifted." Another added, "And so must we." Richard stood. "We go public with the truth." Ethan looked at him. "Are you ready for what that costs?" Richard nodded. "I am now." Ethan rose. "Then I'll stand beside you. Not as a founder, not as a janitor, but as witness." Vanessa's phone rang again. This time, it was a number she recognized, legal. She answered slowly. "Miss Harrington, the voice said. "We need to discuss your resignation." The lie had failed, and the truth had begun to speak. The cameras were already rolling when Richard stepped up to the podium. Flashes burst across the room like distant lightning. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, questions loaded with expectation. Behind the glass walls, employees watched in silence. "This company was founded on a promise," Richard began, "and recently, we failed to honor it." The words spread instantly, live-streamed, clipped, reposted. "I want to address the rumors directly," he continued. "An independent investigation has found no wrongdoing by our founder, Ethan Cole." A murmur swept through the room. Richard stepped aside. Ethan walked forward, not hidden, not silent, not invisible. "I didn't come back to reclaim power," Ethan said calmly. "I came back to remind us what it's for." A reporter shouted, "What about Vanessa Harrington?" Richard answered before Ethan could. "Effective immediately. She has resigned from all company roles." Gasps. Cameras clicked faster. Vanessa watched from her penthouse, the sound muted, her name crawling across the bottom of the screen. "CEO's wife resigns amid ethics probe." She turned off the TV. Back at the podium, Ethan continued. "Power reveals who we are when no one is watching." A reporter asked, "Why disguise yourself?" Ethan paused. "Because people treat truth differently when it wears ordinary clothes." The room fell quiet. Richard concluded, "We will rebuild with transparency." Applause followed, not loud, not celebratory, but real. Later that evening, the building emptied slowly. Employees spoke more openly. Executives walked carefully. And for the first time, respect wasn't assumed. It was earned. Vanessa stood alone in her apartment, surrounded by silence thicker than any crowd. The humiliation she had planned, public, undeniable, had returned to her, not as revenge, as consequence. She stared at her reflection and finally understood the moment she laughed at the janitor was the moment everything began to fall apart. The building felt different, not quieter, just more honest. Morning light spilled through the glass atrium as employees walked in, unsure of what the day would bring. There were no speeches waiting for them, no banners, no dramatic announcements, just work. But something had shifted. In the cafeteria, executives waited in line instead of cutting ahead. A manager picked up a tray left behind by someone else. Small things unremarkable to outsiders felt monumental inside those walls. Ethan walked through the lobby unnoticed again, and this time, he smiled. Richard joined him near the elevators. "They're asking questions," he said. "Real ones." Ethan nodded. "That's how it starts." They stepped outside, the city alive around them. "I won't be here forever," Ethan said. "I know," Richard replied. "But I'll leave something behind." Richard looked at him. "What?" Ethan gestured toward the building. "A reminder." Inside, a new plaque was being mounted quietly near the entrance. No press, no fanfare. It read, "This company was built by people who believed no one should be invisible." Employees stopped to read it. Some smiled, some swallowed hard. Across town, Vanessa packed boxes, not hurriedly, not angrily, just carefully. Every item she wrapped felt like proof of how quickly power disappears when it's borrowed instead of earned. She paused at a mirror, touching the glass lightly. There was no one left to blame. Back at headquarters, a janitor wiped down the boardroom table. He noticed the plaque through the glass wall, straightened his shoulders, and for the first time in years, he felt proud not because someone important noticed him, but because someone had remembered. Ethan stood across the street, watching the building one last time. He didn't wave, he didn't announce his departure. He simply turned and walked away. Because true influence doesn't need an audience, it just needs truth. 3 weeks later, a single envelope arrived, no logo, no return address, just Ethan's handwriting. Richard opened it alone in his office. Inside was a letter, short, deliberate, and unmistakably final. "Richard, you asked once why I walked away. The truth is, I didn't leave because I was tired of the company. I left because I was afraid of becoming what I saw power doing to us. Richard paused, reading slowly. When people stopped challenging me, I stopped listening. That's when I knew it was time to disappear. Richard leaned back, his throat tight. I came back not to reclaim control, but to return humility to the room. If this place can survive without me watching, then it deserves to exist. The letter ended with a single line. Don't let comfort replace conscience. Richard folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Across town, Vanessa sat in a small apartment, now quiet, modest, stripped of excess. She opened her laptop and searched for her name. The headlines were gone. No outrage, no sympathy, just absence. She closed the laptop and stared out the window. For the first time, there was no audience and no excuse. Back at headquarters, a board meeting ended early, not from crisis, but agreement. Richard stood by the window as employees filtered out below. He watched a maintenance worker laugh with a junior analyst. No hierarchy, just humanity. That night, the cleaning crew finished late. One janitor noticed something taped discreetly to the staff bulletin board. A photocopy of a handwritten note, no signature, just words. How you treat the unseen is who you really are. The janitor read it twice, then smiled. Some lessons don't arrive loudly. They arrive quietly and stay forever. Vanessa didn't plan the visit. In fact, she almost turned back twice. The building was smaller than she expected. No glass walls, no valet, just a simple community center tucked between two brick apartments. She stepped inside. The smell of disinfectant and coffee reminded her of places she never used to notice. A man at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Ethan Cole," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He nodded. "He volunteers on Thursdays." She waited. Minutes stretched uncomfortably. Then she saw him. Ethan stood near a storage closet, stacking donated supplies. No uniform, no title, just a man helping quietly. For a moment, she watched from a distance. This was the man she had laughed at. She approached slowly. "Ethan," she said. He turned. There was no surprise in his eyes. "I wondered if you'd come," he said. She swallowed. "I didn't come to argue." "Good," he replied. "I'm not here to win." They stood in silence. "I humiliated you," she said finally, publicly. "Yes," he said. "I told myself you deserved it," she continued. "That people like you should know their place." Ethan looked at her gently. "And now?" She exhaled shakily. "Now I know I didn't know mine." The words broke something open. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not because I lost everything, but because I forgot you were human." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's all an apology needs to be." She looked down. "Do you forgive me?" Ethan paused. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I give," he said. "It's a door you walk through." She nodded, understanding. They didn't shake hands. They didn't hug. They didn't need to. As Vanessa turned to leave, she stopped. "You changed everything." Ethan smiled faintly. "No, you did. I just held up the mirror." She left the building lighter than she arrived, and for the first time, she walked away without power, but with truth. Stories that settle into walls. Stories don't always end. Some of them settle into walls. Months passed. The company didn't collapse. It didn't explode into glory either. It simply changed. Orientation looked different now. New hires were told the story, not names, not headlines, just the lesson. Managers were trained differently. Evaluations included questions no one had dared ask before. Who do you overlook? Who cleans up after you? The plaque in the lobby became a quiet landmark. Employees brushed past it daily, but many slowed down just for a second. The janitor who had wiped the boardroom table that night was promoted not as a reward, as recognition. Richard watched it all from a distance. Leadership felt heavier now, but cleaner. He kept Ethan's letter locked in his drawer. He didn't read it often. He didn't need to. Across the city, Ethan walked the same routes every day, volunteered, mentored, disappeared into the rhythm of ordinary life. People didn't know his story, and that was exactly how he wanted it. One afternoon, a group of interns stood near the lobby plaque. "Is it true?" one asked. About the janitor? An older employee smiled. The truth is simpler than the story. What's that? How you treat people matters. The intern nodded, thoughtful. Elsewhere, Vanessa began over, not dramatically, not publicly. She worked, she learned, she listened. Some doors stayed closed, others opened quietly, and that was enough. Years later, someone would ask Richard what changed the company's culture. He would pause and say, "A man we didn't see." Because the most powerful legacy isn't built by dominance, it's built by humility. 5 years later, the gala returned, same building, different energy. The chandeliers still glittered, the music still flowed. But something had changed in the way people moved, slower, more aware, less entitled. A young server pushed a cart carefully along the edge of the room. Someone noticed and stepped aside. On stage, Richard adjusted the microphone. "This evening," he said, "we're celebrating growth, not just in numbers, but in character." The crowd listened. "There was a night," he continued, "when we learned something the hard way. No names were mentioned, no faces shown, but everyone knew the story." In the back of the room, the server paused to listen. Richard's voice softened. "We learned that dignity doesn't wear a title, and humility doesn't need applause." Applause rose anyway, not loud, but long. The server smiled. Across the room, a woman in a simple dress watched quietly. Vanessa, not a guest of honor, just a guest. She clapped softly. When the gala ended, the server finished his shift and headed toward the exit. A senior executive stopped him. "Hey," she said, "thank you for tonight." He nodded, surprised. Outside, the night air was cool. The city hummed. And somewhere, not far away, Ethan stood across the street, just like before, watching, not for validation, but for peace. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd one last time. Years later, no one talked about the humiliation. They talked about the pause, the moment when laughter died, when a man in a gray uniform stood still, and the most powerful people in the room realized they had misjudged everything. That moment became legend not because of scandal, but because of silence. At the company, new employees still heard the story during orientation, not as gossip, not as warning, but as truth. Respect is revealed when no one is watching. Richard often thought about that night, not with pride, with gratitude, because losing control had given him clarity. He had learned something leadership books never taught him. Power doesn't change people, it exposes them. Vanessa understood that now too. She never regained what she lost, and she stopped trying to. Instead, she rebuilt something smaller, quieter, and real. No applause followed her anymore, but she listened more and spoke less. That mattered. Ethan was never mentioned by name in public. There was no statue, no award, no foundation bearing his face. And that was intentional. Because the greatest lesson he left behind wasn't about success, it was about seeing. Seeing the janitor, seeing the intern, seeing the person you think is beneath you. On a random evening, long after the story faded from headlines, a young executive held the door open for a cleaner. "After you," he said. The cleaner nodded, and the world shifted just slightly for the better. Somewhere out there, Ethan walked unnoticed through a city that no longer needed him to prove anything. The humiliation that had been planned for him never arrived. Instead, it returned to teach everyone else a lesson they would never forget. Because in the end, she thought he was just the janitor. What she didn't expect was that her moment of cruelty would become everyone else's moment of clarity. If this story reminded you to treat people with respect, hit the like button. It helps more than you think. Subscribe now for more powerful stories that reveal truth, humility, and real-life lessons. And tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you the most?